Hello everyone, this is Lam here. In today's video, I want to talk about the X-T3 versus a lot of the other Fuji camera systems that are currently out there. The reason why I'm doing this is because a lot of people have been asking me questions in the comments, in the emails, also in person. So I just want to do a quick video giving you my perspective on the X-T30 versus all of these other cameras. A couple of things that I do want to mention before we get started. Number one, the cameras that I'm going to be going over, which is the X-T3, the X-T2, the X-T20, and also the X-H1, which I'm recording on right now. These are the only camera systems that I will be covering because I have first-hand experience with all of them. I have owned them or have already sold off the camera body, but I do have extensive experience with all these camera bodies, so I feel like I can talk about them. I don't really have a lot of experience with the A cameras, the Pro cameras, the E cameras, so I'm really not going to include those because I don't feel like I'm a good subject matter expert for those type of camera systems. Another caveat that I want to put out there is that I'm not going to be reviewing these as a photographer or a professional photographer. I'm not trying to make money off of this through photography. I do occasionally do that, but that's more of a I know a person or a person asked and I'm trading favors or things like that. So I'm not trying to be a professional photographer. I'm going at this as an enthusiast and also a YouTube content creator. So keep in mind that that's the perspective that I'm going to be going through when I'm talking about these camera systems. So let's go ahead and get started. The first camera system I do want to talk about is the X-T3, the big brother of the X-T30. And the reason why is because obviously this camera is just going to be spec better than the X-T30. The big caveat, of course, is that this is going to be a much more expensive camera. What's my take on this? Well, what I would tell you is that if you can afford an X-T3, I think you should always go with an X-T3 because this is weather sealed, it's got dual card slots, it's got better specs, and it's going to be a really great camera for both video and photography. I know it weighs a little bit more, I know it's a little bit bigger, but it's not that much bigger, and I feel like it's actually properly proportioned to where if you can carry around an X-T30, you can also carry around an X-T3. Now, the big caveat, and it's the big reason why something like an X-T30 is in the picture, and that's price. You know, if you're getting into the Fuji system and you also need a lens, an X-T3 can be a very pricey camera to get into the Fuji system. And that's something that I recognize, and I realize that a lot of people probably should start with a smaller entry camera like the X-T30 because you're getting the best of what Fuji has to offer in the CPU and the camera lens, and that's what's really important. You're not going to get as good of an EVF. You only have one card slot. It's not weather sealed, but you know, those things you can work around. The key thing here is that you're getting the sensor and the CPU combo in here that's top of the line, and it's going to get a lot more firmware revision. So that's super important. From my perspective, if you can afford an X-T3, then you should go with an X-T3. Now, where things get a little bit tricky is that if you're looking at the X-T2 versus an X-T30, things get a little bit muddied because what I would recommend for you to do is that if you're interested in getting an X-T2, then all of a sudden a used X-T2, and this is where I'm going to, you know, defer to how I like to buy things. If you're going to buy last gen's Fuji camera systems, I definitely recommend looking at it from a used perspective. I don't think it's really worthwhile buying a brand new X-T2. I think you should buy a used X-T2 in very good conditions. There are plenty of used markets out there with very high quality returns so that if you don't like it, you can easily return it and it's going to save you a bunch of money. If you're primarily going to be using it for photography, the X-T2 is an amazing camera system. I think you will still love it. You're really not going to notice a big difference in terms of picture image. You really have to pixel peep, and at the end of the day, I'm not a big pixel peeper. So if you're a spec junkie and you know it's either between an X-T2 and an X-T30, then you probably still would want to go with an X-T30 if you're a spec junkie. But if you're in it to learn photography, if you love photography, you just love the ergonomics of the Fuji systems, then I would recommend looking at the X-T2 used and then waiting for the X-T30 or the X-T3 to drop down the price and then upgrade at that price point. But for me, the X-T2 still an amazing system. Now, if you're trying to use video along with the photography part of your X-T2, then I would actually bump you over to the X-T30. That's the big selling point for me when it comes to the X-T30, is that the capabilities of the video systems has really caught up. It's super amazing. The focusing system is really good. I really truly think if you want a really good hybrid camera, you're going to want to go with the X-T30 over the X-T2, because the video capabilities of the X-T2, it's just not really there yet. Also keep in mind, like I've said before, the X-T2 probably at the end of its life in terms of getting firmware updates. Right now, the X-T2 is on version 4, which is pretty high. Right now, the X-T3 is on version 2. So this still probably has another 2 major firmware updates before it becomes end of life. The X-T1 is on version 5. So that kind of gives you an idea of how many major version updates that each camera system gets. Now, if you're talking about the X-T20 versus the X-T30, this is where I guess things get a little bit weird, because the X-T20 at this point is a fairly cheap camera. Again, I'm going to go with the fact that you should buy the X-T20 used, because I don't think it's worthwhile buying it brand new, just like I mentioned for the X-T2. At the price point of an X-T2, which is probably around the $400 price range at this point, that is a really good price to get into an X-T camera that's still very capable. I still use this quite a bit for, my thumbnails on YouTube. A lot of the thumbnails that you see on YouTube is actually from the X-T20. It's just because it's around the most and it's the easiest one I can pick up, take a quick picture, and then go ahead and edit the raw file. So just keep that in mind. If you see a lot of pictures on YouTube, a lot of them comes from the X-T20, and I still think it's a very super capable photography camera. But again, if you talk about video, this really falls apart really quickly. It is the least capable of the video camera systems that I want to talk about. Unfortunately, the video capabilities of the X-T20 is very limited. Chief amongst which is that it overheats when you're recording in 4K pretty easily. There's only a 10-minute limit. It's just very limited. The focusing system in 4K is not very good. In fact, you have to do it pretty much all manually in order to do it in 4K. The 1080p, not that bad at all, but if you're looking for a good hybrid camera, then I would steer you away from the X-T20. I know it's only 2 years old, but it really does feel really dated when you compare it to an X-T3 or an X-H1 and the up-and-coming X-T30. So by far the cheapest one, if you want to buy used at about $400 for the camera body, it'll definitely get you into the Fuji system for a really great price, and it's still a very capable photography camera. I just would not recommend it if you want to be a hybrid shooter. The last camera that I do want to talk about is the X-H1, which I'm recording on right now, so I can't hold it in hand. And this is probably the hardest one to try to find a niche for, because there's not, the X-T3 is so good that it's hard to actually say that the X-H1 will win in one specific category or not. And that's just how it is. There's only 2 things that I can think of, and they're kind of borderline things that would benefit you. One of them is pretty important, and that is if you love shooting with prime lenses, if your thing is only prime lenses and you don't like these telephoto zooms or variable zooms or anything like that, then the X-H1 makes a very compelling case with its in-body stabilization, because none of the prime lenses in the Fuji lineup has OIS, or optical image stabilization. There are a lot of people that have reported some amazing results using the X-H1 with prime lenses, and I tend to believe them. I saw the pictures. They look amazing for what they do. They're getting really low shutter rates on prime lenses on the X-H1 and getting away with a lot of things that I normally think you cannot get away with. So that's probably one of the big things. Again, my same caveat applies. If you are going to buy the X-H1, I definitely recommend buying it used, because pretty much all of the last gen cameras I put in the buy used category. All of the current gen, if you buy it brand new, I have no problems with it. Sometimes it's actually hard to find these cameras used in the current generation, like the X-T3. You can find them used every once in a while, but they do sell out pretty quickly. But the X-H1, finding them used, you get really good price points on them right now. The second caveat that I will have is if you're doing professional work and you want to look professional, you want your camera gear to look professional, I know for a lot of you, you think that's a little bit weird, but from my experience, from all of the work that I've done professionally, looking professional is just as important as actually presenting professional photos or professional video. Because when you're out there and you're talking to either, the people that you're taking pictures for, or the host, or, all of the guests, you're there as a representative of the person that's paying you. And for you to look professional, you make him look good or her look good. That's something that has paid dividends for me. Anytime I'm doing anything professional, I make sure to look more professional than the guest, or to be just as professional as the guest in appearance, in the mannerisms, and also in the gear that I use, so that when people walk by, they can easily tell you're a professional photographer out there doing a job. So in those scenarios, I always have the X-H1 with the battery grip, with one of my better looking lenses. I also occasionally use the Panasonic GH5, to be honest with you. That's why we have a GH5. So that is a quick rundown of my thoughts on each of the camera systems right now in the Fuji lineup and what I think about them. Keep in mind, these are my perspectives from an enthusiast point of view that occasionally dabbles in professional photography, but it's very rare for me to do that. I am mostly at this time primarily focused in on content creation on YouTube, and also my other photography is more in the studio, which I use different cameras. I don't really use the Fuji cameras for studio work. Just keep that in mind. But if you have any questions, or if you want to offer your opinions on what you think, definitely leave in the comments below. But do you agree with me on my take on all of these camera systems? You might not. Everybody can have an opinion as long as you keep it respectful. That's all I really care about. Anyhow, that's all I have to say. I will see you in the next video.